With Bill Gates at Davos at an event to unveil a new initiative that you're excited about that's dealing with vaccines. Tell us a little bit about the problem you're trying to solve and the solution that you've got to work towards that solving here.
Well, we always have to worry that a new epidemic is going to come along.
Yeah.
A flu epidemic that could go global, something like the Ebola epidemic, which we were lucky was confined to a few countries, but still caused immense health and economic damage. And people often ask, well, can't we just generate a vaccine very quickly, get it out there? And unfortunately, it takes many years to do a completely new vaccine. The design, the safety reviews,
costs,
the manufacturing, all those things mean that an epidemic can be very widespread before that tool would come along. And so after Ebola, the global health community talked a lot about this, including a new type of vaccine platform called DNA-RNA that should speed things along. And so this Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Initiative, CEPI, is 3 countries, Japan, Norway, Germany, and 2 foundations, Wellcome Trust, who we work with on a lot of things, and our foundation, Gates Foundation, coming together to fund actually trying to use that platform and make some vaccines, and so that would help us in the future.
You're trying to do some kind of early intervention with vaccines, so to speak, identify promising candidates, get them some capital to help them develop, have a better awareness of what's out there, what needs to be out there.
Right, so we'll pick some particular threats like MERS, and see if we can't quickly get a vaccine for that. And even if we don't pick the problem, the development of this platform and going through that will cut the lead time a lot. And if we can get it down below a year, the quicker the better.
Yeah.
We showed through some simulation that every week you gain can make a dramatic difference.
What have you learned a little bit watching this, thinking about the problems through Ebola and vaccine, and Zika, of our exposure to the risk of a pandemic, particularly a global pandemic? I mean, have you dug more deeply on this problem in general in the last few years, and that's informing what you're doing here, I guess?
Well, I think anybody who comes to global health learns about the 1917 Spanish flu epidemic that killed an unbelievable number of people, and there is a chance of something like that happening again, and that's 1,000 times worse than Ebola. So there have been flu scares, but nothing at that level. But we always worry, will that happen? And the world isn't as prepared, not going through simulations of these things, talk about it. Yeah. Like all global problems, getting the right cooperation of who should provide the resources and how would responsibility be assigned. It's not easy to solve, but the formation of CEPI shows that people care about this, and there's a piece of...
Why don't you describe for me, as vividly as you can, what it is you're worried about, what it is that the nightmare scenario looks like?
Fortunately, there's very few things, and most of them are very low probability. Some big volcanic explosion, gigantic earthquake, asteroid. But at least in the nuclear case, you've got to say we take it quite seriously. We budget a lot of money, have a lot of people who think about nuclear deterrence, and I'm very glad that work's being done, and I rate the chance of a nuclear war in my lifetime as being fairly low. I rate the chance of a widespread epidemic far worse than Ebola, in my lifetime is well over 50%. If we look at the 20th century and we look at the death chart of the 20th century, I think everybody would say, oh yeah, there must be a spike for World War I. You know, sure enough, there it is, like 25 million. And there must be a big spike for World War II, and there it is, it's like 65 million. But then you'll see this other spike that is as large as World War II right after World War I. And most people, a lot of people would say, well, what? What was that? There's two kinds of flus. There's flus that spread between humans very effectively, and there's flus that kill lots of people. And those two properties have only been combined into a widespread flu once in history. Well, that is Spanish flu. We have no idea where it came from. It's called the Spanish flu because the Spanish press was the freest. They were the first to talk openly about it. And so in the annals of epidemic history, that's the big event. I funded a disease modeling group that uses computer simulation, and that work has been phenomenal in helping us target our polio eradication resources and, you know, which parts of Nigeria should we work harder on. And it's very natural, if you have a group like that, to say, hey, look at something like a Spanish flu in the modern day. Health systems are far better. And so you think, hey, that wouldn't be very bad. Well, we tried it, and there are some assumptions we had to make. But what we showed is that the force of infection because of modern transport, which compared to 1918 is over 50 times as great. And so if you get something like a flu, and you look at that map of how within days it's basically in all urban centers of the entire globe, that is very eye-opening. That didn't happen with Spanish flu in the past. The opportunity to do more than just let it run its course is really only in the last decade. Basically, when you talk about drugs, you can talk about small molecules or talk about these complex biological protein-like things, of which there's a subclass called antibodies. Antibodies are the molecules that the immune system naturally builds to attack disease. Today, the idea that somebody says, oh, here's an antibody, make a lot of it, make it very quickly, that's right on the cutting edge. And the Ebola epidemic showed me that we're not ready for a serious epidemic, an epidemic that would be more infectious and would spread faster than Ebola did. This is the greatest risk of a huge tragedy. This is the most likely thing by far to kill over 10 million excess people in a year. We don't need to invest nearly what we do in military preparedness. This is something where less than $1 billion a year on R&D, medical surveillance, standby personnel, cross-training the military so they can play a role in terms of all the logistics here. This can be done, and we may not get many more warnings like this one to say, okay, it's a pretty modest investment to avoid something that really, in terms of the human condition, would be a gigantic setback. I think an epidemic, either naturally caused or intentionally caused, is the most likely thing to cause, say, 10 million excess deaths, and that it's pretty surprising how little preparedness there is for it. Now, it's tricky because this is a global problem, so you know, how do countries work together, which countries should put up what resources, and you know, every aspect of it, the resources to go engage in the affected countries, the allocation decisions. As we've seen various flu scares come along, we haven't had a super good response. So the paradigmatic examples are smallpox for an intentionally caused thing, that there was a simulation called Dark Winter that didn't come out very well, i.e. smallpox scored 1 and humanity scored 0. Flu epidemics, where you know we always talk about the potential recurrence of a 1917 like Spanish flu problem, and then Ebola, which although it was much smaller, there was some luck involved in that. Because it wasn't spread through respiratory contact, the reproductive rate was a lot lower, and it was basically people who were sick or dead who were doing most of the transmission. And so through a lot of heroic effort and a little bit of luck, it stayed under control and was largely contained to the 3 countries. Zika is still recent enough that the understanding of, okay, should we have seen it sooner? Even understanding what the steady state case looks like in terms of immunogenicity, why it showed up in South America and didn't show up in Africa. I know people are hard at work trying to answer these questions. So the lessons from that one, I'm not trying to minimize that one at all, but I think they're less clear than from Ebola. I think it's too bad in a way that we had to have these epidemics to get us to move, but the timing in terms of the science, the recognition that epidemics don't respect borders, and so whether you're looking at this through a humanitarian lens or a purely domestic lens, these are investments that should be made. I think this is a very positive step.
You launched CEPI because you believe the world is unprepared for the next pandemic. What is CEPI?
CEPI is a coalition for epidemic preparedness, and the idea is to take a new way of building vaccines that could let us develop in less than a year a novel vaccine. They're called DNA RNA vaccines, and so we'll fund a few projects to build specific vaccines, but not only will we get that, we'll prove out that these platforms can work, we'll understand the regulatory issues, and it gives us a chance of being able to respond in time when the next epidemic hits.
What are the new tools that we have at our fingertips to stop the next pandemic?
Well, right now, we're in the same situation we were in before, where it takes years to build a new vaccine. But the scientific idea of these new platforms could radically change that, so that a lot of the steps are sitting there ready. The factory piece, understanding the regulatory piece, and you just have to plug in some information, do some quick safety profiles, and then you can get into manufacturing quite rapidly.
And if we speed up this process, how many people are we actually saving?
Well, we don't always know the risk of an epidemic, and some epidemics, like a flu epidemic, could be absolutely gigantic. So it's hard to put a number to it, but we went back and looked, for example, at Ebola and said that if we'd had a vaccine within 30 weeks, it would have helped quite a bit. If we'd had it within 6 weeks, it would have been dramatically different.
How do epidemics impact our society financially, socially?
Well, the impact of a huge epidemic, like a flu epidemic, would be phenomenal because all the supply chains would break down, there'd be a lot of panic, many of our systems would be overloaded, and so we all hope that doesn't come along, but being ready for epidemics of different sizes, there's a lot more we should do, and CEPI is a step in that direction.
And you've said that we're in an amazing moment in science right now. What's next?
Well, we need vaccines for a lot of things, not just epidemics. We need a HIV vaccine, a tuberculosis vaccine, a malaria vaccine. All of those things are in the works, and over the next decade, I think most of those we'll get solutions for.
And we've come a long way from the work that you and Melinda have done over the years on malaria.
Yes, so all these infectious diseases, deaths have come down, new tools are coming out, and governments have been very generous at supporting this work in partnership with us and others. So it's really an incredibly good news story that health is getting better all over the world.